So, welcome to a conversation that I don't know where it's going to go to. Our beloved friend Ariel Hendelman, Rabbi Ariel Hendelman, brought up this incredible person who I have never met before when she was visiting us. Just a couple of weeks ago, and facilitated this time for us to come together and have our first conversation here on Substack Live. And um, I'm very curious to see what emerges. I feel very much along for the ride, and eager also for the kind of the magic of like the first conversation that you have with someone that you have a lot in common with and a lot to talk about, being recorded and shared. So, welcome, Julie. Welcome, Ariel. Ariel, would you introduce us to each other?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I also feel excited for the emergent nature of this
Mhm.
conversation. So, welcoming my dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Julie Weinstein. Julie and I went through the Olive Ordination program together. We have become chavrutas, sacred learning partners. Julie is the Buddhist and Jewish chaplain. Is that right, Julie? At the LA County Jail. And also does a lot of work with Jewish death and dying and working with communities, as well as like a million other things. But what I thought we would start with and focus on, really, at least for this first conversation, which may be the first of many, is Julie's work in the jails. And we were talking a little bit before we got on about this time of Elul, this time in the Jewish calendar, really being a time of return. But like, what are we returning to? What is that? Home means a lot of different things for different people. The act of return or repentance, as it's sometimes called, means a lot of different things. It doesn't land for some people. And what does that look like in the context of Julie's work in the jails? And so, Julie, I wonder if we can just like start with that. I mean, have you done any visiting with folks in the jails during Elul? What are the conversations like? And then I would love to kind of take that into High Holy Days.
Mm.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I don't talk often about this work too publicly, so happy to answer any questions. But yeah, jail, prison chaplaincy maybe doesn't get uh, quite the audience as some topics might. Tends to be a demographic that some people forget about. So nice to chat about this today. Thanks for having me. I have done chaplaincy in the jails during the month of Elul. It is really beautiful and also pretty devastating, but it's not unlike other months. A jail tends to be a place where some can spend a lot of time lost in deep, deep thought and contemplation. So, Elul kind of amplifies that for some of our Jewish folks that are incarcerated inside when they use this spiritual technology that our ancestors gave us, which we could talk about. What are some of the practices that we might engage in, like tashlik or shofar blowing, or um, questions that might help us prepare for the coming new year. But it's also not, unique, because the month of Elul could be like any other month, in many ways, except for the flavor of the season, which is, entering into the gates of these days of repentance, or however you wanna frame them, and also going through the process of, self-assessment. So, uh, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm curious also because there's a lot of resonance here in the Zoom room,
Mhm.
between the work of both the Jewish and other wisdom tradition paths, and I'm curious about how this sort of, let's say, non-dual path um, really like plays into. I mean, we might say folks in the jail are in Elul all the time, right?
Yeah,
In a sense.
sure.
Um,
Many,
And
yeah.
I'm curious about you wearing these 2 hats, the hat of Buddhist chaplain and Jewish chaplain, and do they ever feel like the same hat?
Yeah,
particularly in the context of this. Yeah.
for sure. And I think chaplaincy, for those that don't know, it really is a path of just bearing witness. And I think that the people that I don't see anybody that doesn't request to see me. We don't proselytize, and I'm not making visits to people who did not either put some kind of form in to request either the Jewish or the Buddhist chaplain, or stopped me, as I'm walking past and requested a visit. But um, I think for those that aren't familiar with chaplaincy, it really is a practice of bearing witness. And the reason why, many times, the reason why I might be called is because they just want someone who does not identify as a Christian chaplain. Maybe they have some spiritual trauma or relationship with the church. I really um, don't ask that question. Why did you ask to see me? I just show up ready to bear witness. Um, and and so folks often, when they request a Buddhist chaplain, want meditation techniques or stress management techniques. Sometimes when I'm requested in my Jewish hat, and I know that might be non-traditional to play this dual role, but that's just my path. Uh, that they might want to talk about a kosher meal request. They actually might want to talk about um, their Judaism and their relationship with Hashem. They might want to explore a particular teaching. Folks inside have a lot of time to read. Sometimes they're wrestling with something that they read. But I would say most of my work inside is just pastoral counseling. It really goes beyond religion. It's just simply accompanying folks that are suffering. So we do talk about religion sometimes, and in a particular context, but most of the time it's just one-on-one pastoral counseling that goes beyond um, organized religion, and there is a lot of spiritual trauma or religious trauma, especially folks inside who might be thinking that they're going to burn in hell. I get a lot of questions about that,
Mm.
um, or people that have been rejected by their families or rejected by their church for whatever that happened for them to go inside. So
Amazing. I'm so grateful that you're there for them, and it's such important work, and so, as you said, like, very much in the back of the minds of our collective. Um, Really, really powerful, and I'm really struck by what you said about, like, in some way, them kind of being in a little, like, all the time, and I know that probably the majority of my audience on Substack is not Jewish, and does not have a relationship with, or maybe even doesn't have a conception of what we might mean by the spiritual technology of the Hebrew calendar, what Elul is, what its significance is, why it's so intense for all of us. And I'm curious if either of you are in conversation, would be open to just kind of laying bare, laying it out on the table, the kind of, like, I see it as like this, spiralic, sacred, time slinky kind of
totally.
technology. And I'd love to hear how you all characterize it, and might introduce it to folks who maybe have a deep spiritual orientation, and maybe even have a relationship with the sacred cycling of the seasons, um, through the earth, through astrology, perhaps even through moon cycles, but don't know about what the Jewish, the central
Hmm.
technology of Jewish spiritual life is.
Yeah. Ariel, you want to go first, and I'll.
Sure, I can say a little something. So the in Hebrew, there's an acronym for Elul that I think is helpful to just sort of start with, which is Ani ledodi v'dodi li. And that means I am for my beloved and my beloved is for me. Or I belong to my beloved and my beloved belongs to me. And we're talking about beloved like capital B, right? Um, and there's a sense that there's a rhythm of all of life. And that rhythm is really, we can think of it like the tides. We can think of it like bodies making love, but there's a like getting farther away and a coming close together. And there's a getting farther away and there's a coming close together. We could think of it like forgetting and remembering also. And Elul is really a time of like deliberately, intentionally coming close together again. And that happens with our deepest selves. And that also happens with the source of all life, whatever we might call the source of all life. And there really feels like there's an invitation. Like we are being called, like, come close. I miss you. I miss you. Come back. And that's sort of part of what we're returning to. And the other part might be kind of wiping off the schmutz, the dirt that gets accumulated, so that we can see where in our life we might not be living in alignment with our soul's purpose. And Elul again is this time of being invited to just like look at that, just look at what is. Unfortunately, there's sort of a patriarchal God framing that gets put onto it, which is like, well, you're doing this preparation because then you're going to be judged. And I don't believe in that. I think we judge ourselves and we judge each other. I don't think the source of all life, God, isness itself judges us. That just doesn't feel true in my experience. But that doesn't mean judgment doesn't play a part in our own minds, in our own lived experience. But that this really feels like this month leading up to then the Jewish New Year, is this time of coming close, is this time of intimacy, with oneness. Yeah, Julie, I'm so curious, like where you would take this.
Yeah, well, I'll pull the camera back a little bit because you had asked about Jewish time, and we do have a deep connection with the sacred calendar. I think we are more rooted in time than we are place, right? As opposed
Because
to
of
the
the
physical
displacement of place.
yeah. And so we root in time, and that's why we have a Shabbat, a Sabbath every week, and our calendar spirals from that. I mean, we have the day, and the day is sacred, and then we have the week, and the Shabbat is what separates us from the sort of sacred and the mundane, if you will. And then we have a monthly cycle, and we have a seasonal cycle, and we have all these holidays sprinkled within the calendar. And this is the way that we orient in sacred time and place is through the calendar. And the month of Elul, I guess, like maybe to really, really simplify it, the secular analogy would be like if you did a whole bunch of deep spiritual work in December ahead of New Year's Eve. The 10 days between Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, which we would say like the Day of Atonement, which has a lot of like really cool, deep mystical meaning. It is really more of a joyful day, but that's a whole nother Substack conversation for another time. But the way that we orient in this month of Elul is to with our bodies too, do deep spiritual preparation for the coming year. And that is the work of teshuvah, the work of returning that Ariel's talking about. We blow a shofar every day, really to wake ourselves. Pay attention, wake up, hear this loud sound. Um, we do an accounting of our soul. Cheshbon hanefesh. We take a good look. What did I do this year? How was it for me? What are my highs and lows? Who do I owe an apology to? It's not that everything is reserved for Elul and you don't have to be a good person for the rest of the calendar year. But this is the time where we collectively, because we don't want anyone to have to do anything alone. We pray these prayers and we use we language. Even if we didn't do the thing, do the English word would be sin, but it's really like an archery term where you miss the mark. I didn't miss the mark on this per se, right? I never, knock on wood, got a speeding ticket this year, for example, or something. But we would say we own this together. We're all in it together,
Mhm.
and that's why the minyan, the collective, is so important to us. So you don't have to experience
Prayer
shame.
group. Yeah.
Can we get a group of people together to say these prayers or to sing this song together? But we orient in space and time in ways that our ancestors did for thousands of years, and go through this sort of practice where we're crying out, where we're really saying, like, I did this thing, or I didn't do this thing and I should have done it. It's not a shaming ritual. It's not for shame. It's not supposed to make you feel terrible, but it's the work of at least scrubbing your heart cave. Ram Dass talks about polishing the mirror. My teacher talks about polishing the mirror of your heart. And there's a lot of ways to do that, and that is, I think, what the work of Elul is. And so, thank you for asking this question. Yes, I mean, the work that we do in the Hebrew month of Elul, is maybe much like work that's happening any day for folks that are, being incarcerated, sitting there all day reading things, maybe holy books or things, and thinking about what they did or didn't do. Now, I do wanna say, there are a lot of people that are incarcerated that really shouldn't that didn't do anything. They're just, like, victims of systemic injustice and bad policies. So, um, you know, d by and large, the majority of people that are in there are probably held on some kind of drug charge or survival sex work or whatever. That's also another conversation, but the point is, when you're in a place like a hospital or a jail and you don't necessarily wanna be there, you do some soul accounting, and I think that was what Ariel was saying, that.
Totally. There's a couple of threads that just arose for me as you were speaking that I just wanna weave in of different, like, lineage, like, sacred wisdom pieces, and one of them is, that phrase, "polishing the mirror," comes from the opening lines of the Hanuman Chalisa, which is this 40 verse, amazing, beautiful, prayer to Hanuman, who is the god of service. And I was born and raised on an ashram, in the lineage of Neem Karoli Baba, who is Ram Dass's teacher, Ram Dass's guru. And so, like, we were required to sing the Hanuman Chalisa every day before lunch, like, as a group. But I remember my mom always saying, um, that she was so grateful that we were made to memorize the Chalisa, because if we were ever she had always had the thought that for herself, if she was ever in prison, that would be her refuge, would
Yeah,
just be singing the Chalisa again and again. And when I have been in my deepest times of suffering, that has been a huge, tremendous practice for me. And the opening lines translate to, after cleansing the mirror of my mind with the pollen dust of the holy guru's lotus feet. It's like this beautiful
yeah,
invitation to, like, a relationship of devotion that is for the cleansing of your own self and of the obscurations that keep us from the true self that we are shining forward. And, the first Substack conversation we had, Ariel and I, we were kind of weaving around the word Emunah, which is the name of, like, the academy that my husband and I have created for a lot of reasons.
mhm,
And Emunah is that, like, devotional, trusting relationship, like a it's so much more dynamic than faith, in my opinion. And that, I'm just kind of making the connection of, like, the bhakti tradition, devotional practice there, and the and why Amuna is, like, such a core value to us that we would name our whole business, that word. And there was, this other piece that I think I've had this thought on Yom Kippur, and then I always forget it for the rest of the year.
mhm,
So thank you for bringing it forward so that I can think about it, a little bit in advance, which is that collective, atonement practice, that you alluded to, that is, like, acknowledging harms and like taking it on, and like whether or not you did that bad thing to someone, someone did, and maybe a part of your mind did, and like by taking some level of responsibility and accountability, it is a powerful spiritual technology. And it reminded me of, I don't know if either of you are familiar with the Bodhisattva's way of life, but there's like an entire chapter that is like prayers and liturgy that you do in certain Buddhist practices, where you are that are it is confessions, and you are making confessions of like, I did this, I did this, I did this, I murdered these people, like I all of these horrible things. And I think the first time I really connected with that was, um it was like in some context, I think it was during the first Trump presidency, and I
Mm.
really was like feeling like taking on, like being an American citizen, existing in this system, not having a choice but to be complicit in many aspects of the system that we live within. Um, but also like at the time I was living very close to Mar-a-Lago, and we would do these, like, rose, womb healing rituals, and we would take the roses after the ceremonies, and we would throw them we would drive by Mar-a-Lago, we would throw them out the window to the ocean, but we would say Ho'oponopono, like, to Donald Trump,
Yeah.
during that time. It was, like, me and my girlfriends, like, what we would do on a weekend,
Yeah.
and, this, like, practice of bringing Ho'oponopono in, of just, like, uh, and saying, like, to Donald Trump even, like, "Thank you, I'm sorry, please forgive
Right.
me, I love you." It was, like, the hardest thing in the world for
Yeah.
me, and also so, like, it was really helpful, connecting to, like, the fact that, like, oh, like, he's in a fucked up prison
Oh,
that's
yeah, sure.
so, like, much harder to break out of than, like, it's very, like, to recognize the kind of intractable layers of constriction in the mind and in the system that we're living within, and to, like, there's something that just feels so radical and so beautiful about, like, and vulnerable and scary and intense, but, like, so transformative about, like, stepping with your whole body into the field of interdependence from a place of just, like, even just for this one moment, I'm gonna take accountability for the whole. And we're g and the beautiful thing about how it's done in Buddhism and in Judaism is, like, you do it with a sangha, you do it with a minyan, you do it with your
Yeah.
congregation. Like, you are stepping into this space together because it's too much for any one person to hold on their
Yeah.
own. But it's like this is like a very important, like, practice of tikkun that, again, like, you can look in all these different traditions and find different ways of doing it, that are uniquely appropriate, for whatever culture and place you happen to be occupying. So those are like a lot of the streams of thought that just wove together for me. This is why I'm an interspiritual minister, and it can't be anything
I
but
agree. So much of what you just shared really resonates, and I'm glad that you brought up the Chalisa. That is my practice as well, and I just wanna encourage anybody to, maybe be open to exploring some of the songs or hymns or chants from other faith practices because they could be really heart-opening. I'll show it so I bring a notebook in to jail with me, for documentation and taking notes and whatever, and, um and you talked about Maharaji, he comes everywhere
Oh.
with me. But the example of Hanuman is really, I think, why I do this work, Hanuman is
Yeah.
a servant of Ram, for those that aren't familiar with Hanuman, and,
And
um
his and the whole the I'm just realizing, like, such a critical piece of Hanuman's story is that he had to go into the prison. It was a garden, but it was a prison for Sita. It was where she was being held captive. Um,
right,
and he had to, like, go in there and, like, demonstrate that he was not an illusion and that he was not a
right,
part of the field of illusions, that were keeping her captive, that he was, in fact, an emissary of the beloved. And I always relate to, Sita as as the earth. She was born of the earth. She went back to the earth, and Ram, her husband, her beloved, as like the cosmos, as like the beloved context, the all. And that Hanuman is like this emissary between them when they're separated. And he's a monkey, which to me means that he's like the most human of them all. He's like our ancestor.
Right.
And and that he's also the son of the wind god. He's the breath. And that it's
Right.
like through our humanness and through our breathing and through our breath, we can be the embodiment of that service of the connection between the earth and the cosmic context that sometimes, because of the senses, that's the Ravana, the king, that held her captive. He was like a master of all of the senses. And
Right.
so it's like the sensory world that we live within of modernity is like holding the earth captive. It seems to be separate, but that it's like just a breath away from that reconnection. So that's
Beautiful.
that's the way
Yeah.
that I see that
Almost
Ramayana.
sounds like the shofar in a way.
Yeah. Hanuman can make
Okay.
himself really, really big and really, really tiny. And I think about that. How small can I make myself when I go in, inside to
And
jail?
that what you just said, Ariel, of the shofar as well, like the blasts of the shofar can be very, very small and very, very big. And that's the breath, is like
Yeah.
that's the power of breath. Wow, this is really
And
nerding
it's
me out in this
interesting
way.
sometimes to try to blow the shofar in jail where you may or may not be allowed to have a loud noise. And
Yeah.
sometimes you get pre-clearance sometimes to do that. But sometimes, and and I were talking about this the other day, like sometimes it's really um, shocking on the system, especially for people who are survivors of trauma, to have a loud noise.
Yeah.
Maybe not the person who asked you to blow it, but maybe the person down the hall that's like, oh my God, what is that noise? And so it's a different experience. We think of blowing the shofar as like joyful or revelatory or, it's such a good thing to do. And then, there is a shadow to loud noise that we
Yeah, I'm
maybe.
curious, what is the protocol for that? And in my mind, the way that I would want to design it is like informing everyone who will be exposed to it what it is, so that they're
Right.
prepared from a trauma-informed perspective, but also, like, giving some context of, like, not just like, "Oh, it's a Jewish thing, we're gonna make a loud noise," but being like, "This is what this is. If you want to tune into it, like, you're welcome to, no matter what your spiritual background is." Is that possible? I don't know.
Not always, no, and sometimes that's not safe to do. Anti-Semitism inside of jails and prisons is very real and scary, and so it could be unsafe for the person to be exposed for their, religion or spirituality. That could be one scenario. Another scenario would be I can't just go walk up to someone's cell door. I can't make a general announcement. We're not proselytizing. You know, join in if you'd like would be pretty borderline.
Mm.
Mhm.
Uh, so that doesn't always work. It's a little tricky, and some chaplains do have access to, like, a chapel area, and some do not. It's sometimes not an option, there isn't one. Sometimes you could go out, there's, like, a kind of balcony area that would be, like, the rec area, but again, it's concrete, and so your sound's gonna be even louder. So it's tricky, and you just have to figure out how best to navigate to keep your person safe or your people if you're in a group. If you're offering a service, which is a different setup, if you have a bunch of people in a chapel or in a classroom space, you have to prepare everybody to hear the sound differently. What will happen? What kind of security do you need to have present? What kind of response? There's just a little bit more thought that has to go into like curating a group experience, especially. Um, but yeah, it's just different. It's not the sort of like impromptu, and then you have to think like, well, how loud should I blow this? How loud could I blow this? Blowing a shofar is not that easy for a lot of people. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of lung capacity and some skill. Maybe it's a new shofar and you're not so
You
practiced.
have to practice, yeah.
Are
So
you the one blowing it?
yeah, I blow it.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's fumbly, you have to carry something in. Anytime you're carrying a whole bunch of stuff in your hands, not so safe. You're going up and down stairs. So there's just a lot to think about. But I do bring it in sometimes, and I do blow it. To me, it feels like a reclamation of space. Like, how can I blast as much love into this space as possible? Um, that's always my intention, but it really just depends on the situation. And, gender can play into it sometimes as well. Um, so you have to think about that too. There's just a lot to consider. It's a little trickier.
Mhm.
Yeah. I feel like we're sort of touching on something that to me feels important as a space holder and spiritual leader and practitioner, which is like that spiritual technology is not a one size fits all, right? And that like what really works for some may not work at all for others. Or it
Right,
might work for some in a certain time and space and not work for those very same people in another time and space.
right.
As I'm listening to you speak so beautifully about this, Julie, I'm also thinking about um in just a few weeks hearing shofar in the community that I'll be leading, which is like mostly folks in their 60s and 70s, um, in outside of Boston. And it could be that the shofar might not work for all those folks either. But I'm also just thinking about like hearing the shofar, and also if we are doing this as shamnu, this practice of I take responsibility for all the things that could happen because the many are also one and the one is also many.
Right,
And we are actually doing this practice with the folks in jail, whether or not we're there with them. But to
right.
actually bring that in consciously
Yeah.
feels like just feels like something new to me that feels very resonant and important. And also to go back to, I don't think I know the bodhisattva path as well as the two of you, but my limited understanding of it is that it's aspirational. And it feels to me like what we call the tzaddik in Judaism, like the righteous one. But that this sense of walking on a path that we know we can actually never fulfill. Like, can we actually hold all those folks in jail, reach all of them? Well, maybe not, but we can aspire to open our hearts in such a way that our tshuva process actually includes all that is. And that is both totally impossible and totally possible at the same time.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, one thing I do wish for faith leaders or for, rabbis specifically or faith leaders is that when we offer those prayers that we say as a we, that sort of a nachnu energy, that we take a minute and say who we're calling in and including. I mean, there's like a consent piece to that too, because I don't know that everybody wants to be included, but for those that do, that we would just invoke them, those that couldn't make it here today, those that didn't know that they were welcome here today, those that are probably in a hospital bed, immobile, or incarcerated and being held, for an indeterminate amount of time, that we like, go beyond the immediate we. We did this, we did that, we did that, and then I know in our minds, we're probably like, "I would never do that,"
Mm.
you know? But actually you can, and you could, you're just one paycheck away from this scenario, or maybe you're just one you know, drink away from that scenario, or we don't know what we are truly capable of, but if you can do that, I probably could too.
Yeah.
And so, I wish we would spend a little bit more time before we invoked the we prayers or the shofar sound or whatever it is to think about, um, who that really means and who we're saying this for or doing this thing for. And 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 also the mystery, right? Like, I don't know that Ganga and I aren't chanting the Chalisa at the same time, but we did communicate that, you know? Um, there's a mystery in that, which is like, I actually didn't know because we had never met before that you were chanting, and you probably didn't know that I was chanting. And so that tells me, like, When I was giving birth, I was thinking I had a really long labor for my first one, and I was thinking, like, how many people are giving birth right now in the world that don't know that I'm giving birth because I don't know that they're giving birth? It's just sort of similar, like, we're in this struggle together, you know?
Totally. And then after you give birth, I don't know about you, but the for, like, I don't know how long because I guess it's still happening, but it was so strong in the first couple of hours, my primary thought was every single human being that ever has been, someone had to go through that
Yeah,
to bring them here, and
yeah,
really feeling, like, the enormous preciousness and fragility and power and intensity of
yeah,
that on a level that is, like, just can't be accessed with words or allegory or art or anything other than, like, your whole body being torn open and, like, traversing to a different plane to bring life forward, and then being like, "Wow, every single human being that ever has been." Like, the enormity of that is so massive, and that really, that is a place that I go back to when I think about prisons, when I think about the detention centers, when I think about just all of the horrific ways that we mistreat our family, you know?
yeah, and even just the fullness of that holiness of humanity, like, also how many people wish that they could do that, or how many people just did that and wished that they never did that and are afraid of what comes next.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so when we go into the shul to pray, in like comfortable or privileged ways or not, right? There's a lot of people that go in that have fear or doubt or a million other feelings. Who are we bringing with us into our prayer consciousness? Um, or even that part of ourself, right? That
Yeah,
is, we're complex beings, but
totally.
yeah.
I also just wanna just add to this, Ganga, you just gave me such a visual of this body being torn open so that life can be. And I'm thinking of, one of the names or one of the phrases that we use to talk about Rosh Hashanah, to talk about the Jewish New Year, literally the head of the new year, right? Is Hayom Harat Olam. It's the day that the world is being born. And
Mhm.
that there's like
And
a
it's the
there's
opening
like
of
a
the gate.
violence to that. As much
Yeah.
as there's a beauty and
Mhm.
a precision and an emergence, there is an immense rupture and
Mm.
pain. And I'm just like I'm sitting with that also as like inherent to this time of the year, spiritually, physically, communally, personally, that they're like inherent in this rupture is happening. Yes, for the sake of opening. Yes, for the sake of life renewing itself and emerging. And just to be with that aspect of like, this is not easy.
Yeah.
I think some of the technologies that our ancestors give, um, specifically in the Jewish lineage, and I know that there are many, many others as well. Um, that rebirth energy that you talked about comes through sometimes water, right? So now here we've talked about space and time, we've talked about sound energy, and one of the technologies of this time for us is water. You can't take a mikveh in jail or prison, and a mikveh is a ritual immersion into a certain amount of water, for like purification reasons. Not to say that you're dirty, but in that rebirth energy. And one of the practices that we have is this thing called tashlik.
I was like, I wanna make sure that I ask about Tashli.
Yeah.
I wanna specifically welcome I'm very curious for both of you how you characterize the spiritual technology of Tashlich, as well as how that's experienced in the prison system.
Yeah. Ariel, maybe you could talk first.
I think tashlich is a really helpful spiritual technology where we use something physical in order to touch into the spiritual. So sometimes it's breadcrumbs, sometimes it's stones, sometimes it's whatever folks can get their hands on. But usually, folks take some time to think about, maybe speak out what we're wanting to release this year. Sometimes it's also what we're calling in and what we're wanting to release. And then you actually grab something physically in your hand and you throw it into a body of water. I have a practice of doing this with some beloveds by a lake, by this beautiful lake. And we'd take stones and then actually watching that physical object, take its journey into the water. And as Julie named, water is an agent uh, of ritual cleansing, which I think goes back to the polishing the mirror of the heart, right? It's about that again. But to have that ability, to have the physical object representing this spiritual, like what's not serving me anymore, or what's just like outdated, that I'm hoping to shed so that I can update the software here to something that's like more helpful.
Mm. Yeah, in Ezekiel, it says, "Cast away from yourselves all your transgressions and create within yourselves a new heart and a new spirit." And I think that's that energy that, rebirth that you were talking about. Um, I have this little handout here that I make for people about tashlik. It's called, I'll show it to you, tashlik in the toilet. And this is what
Yeah.
a typical toilet looks like. Um, talk a little bit about teshuvah, but this tashlik, it means casting off, and it's kind of heartbreaking to tell someone to do it by themselves into the toilet, because I have the privilege of going to the Pacific Ocean with like 200 people dressed in beautiful white clothes with fresh baked challah, and literally, like, after an hour and a half of singing, having this beautiful ritual experience at the ocean. Some people can't do that, and also you get in trouble if you throw something into the toilet. So, also, you don't maybe have the luxury of having anything to cast in, right? Like, you only get so much food inside of there, so wasting is, like, not really a thing. But so we talk about, like, if you could save, a little square of your bread from your sandwich one day, or, like a half of a cracker or something, and then you just tear a little piece like the size half of your pinky nail, and you can use that, right? People are like, "Chunks of bread, let me do this," or rocks or whatever. Um, but yeah, you just take this tiny little piece of bread or cracker or something that's not gonna clog the toilet. You definitely will be thrown into solitary confinement for that, and, um, and do your practice and visualize it being swept into the ocean. The jail here is less than 15 miles from the beach. So, um, I have this prayer that you could say or sing, and I sing to them just so they could hear it once, um, and then I have this section, in Psalm 130, "Out of the depths I call to you, Adonai, hear my cry, hear my plea, be attentive to my prayer. Who could endure?" On and on. It's just like, um, we have this track record of crying out, uh, and so sometimes people don't need words because they're so poetic and they've got it and their prayer is very clear, and sometimes they want something to say to make it, feel like a more of a ritual. But, um, I think about that when I go to toss my challah into this gorgeous ocean. I think about them and all the people that would wanna cast something off, but maybe can't or don't know or don't have access to.
Julie, would you be open to singing that prayer for us that you sing for them?
Well, it's just this one line, and really I put it in here. I mean, we use it different times. We say it, um, when we're in shul, the Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva Chadesh Yemenu Kekedem. Take us back, Adonai, to yourself, and let us come back. Um, renew our days of old. And then this part, Ve'al kulam Elohai slichot. There's a whole bunch of slichot prayers that we say. Um, for all of these, God of forgiveness, forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement. And I think some folks would remember this. Ve'al kulam Elohai slichot, selach lanu mechal lanu, kaper lanu. I don't sing. I'm not a singer, and I was probably out of key, but whatever. I think this is sort of like a ubiquitous, even for those folks that don't go to services a lot, will remember this from high holidays. Is sort of like a through line, like forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement. Forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement. And again, this us language, right?
Mm.
Um, yeah, the that I think this I'll hate this sound, um, is for me, it reminds me that we all miss the mark, you know? Um, I'm just looking at this, like, I'm grateful that we say it together, and I don't want anybody inside to have to feel like they're alone in their shame or their transgression or whatever. 'Cause we all have a whole list. I could spend 6 loaves of challah, and just get started, I'm sure, but, um, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to listen to the prayer from the place of imagining myself
Mm,
in an incarcerated space and, like, receiving that moment of connection as, like, a lifeline.
mm,
Um, and I'll just share very personally what that very much kind of occupying that space brought up for me is, something personal. I don't think, Ariel, I've ever shared this with you. Um, my oldest childhood friend, and it's really tender thinking my son is nearly 4 right now, and, this is someone who was, um, maybe, like, 6 months younger than me and, like, known from birth. He was adopted at birth. His name was Hendelman,
huh,
and he was Black, and yeah, oldest, longest childhood friend, and, he was incarcerated, and when I was in college, and he was in prison,
mm,
and he had lupus, and they denied him, prednisone, which is, like, the cheapest medication in the world. Um, and he died, in a really horrific way, in, like, alone in a van, because of this medical negligence and racism and the carceral system. And, sometimes I feel him more strongly than others, and, just now in that moment, I just felt like with that lifeline, with that deeper connection with the divine, just, like, feeling that, like, the veil growing thin and, many layers of what we've talked about today, kind of, like, feeling my heart and his heart closer,
mm,
um, than I have felt for a long time, and I'm really grateful for that.
mm. Hmm. I'm sorry, and I'm thinking about him. There's so many good organizations to support that. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Human Kindness Foundation, but they're doing such beautiful work. There's also the Humane Prison Project, which does hospice inside of prisons. Um, yeah, no one should have to experience that. And I think Torah tells us that too. How do we treat the stranger? How do we treat the widow? How do we treat the orphan? Um, and I would say, we are all of those things. Um, there's so many sad stories, uh, and injustices and wrongdoing. Um, these are not necessarily healing spaces. I don't know how folks get well in a cell. Um, and then when there are medical complications on top of it, the obstacles are just enormous mountains.
Yeah.
A simple kindness, a simple, um, what one would imagine a simple prescription drug. They're huge hurdles.
Yeah.
And so, usually the jail is like inside of the city. Prisons are usually more remote. It depends on where you live, but they're like, not as easily accessible. So folks in prison don't often get visits like they might in jail. And then who's allowed for a visit and when does lockdown happen? But for the folks that are suffering and need medical attention and have to self-advocate, it can be a particular type of torture that is just so unfair.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, in every single, religious, cultural tradition path, there is clear guidance. I mean, I remember going back to birth, when I was preparing to give birth and for postpartum, I like learned about how like Jewish law, designates like there's like different layers of illness.
Mhm.
Right, like and you guys would know better than me, but that it's like there's like a certain like when you are in like the first few days after having been given birth, you're in this one category of like of being like gravely ill, and then in like for a while after that, you're like less so, but it's like another category, and there's responsibilities that like the family and the community has to care for people under those circumstances, and I it's like such a basic human thing. And again, it's like we live in this world and in this system and like with all of the like relative comforts that, like I know none of our lives are perfect. There are things that we wish were different and there's hardship and obviously the economic system we live in is totally fucked, but like the relative comfort like of the people who are in relative comfort in this world is at the cost of this system that is invisibilized to us, and that's like just a completely different set of rules and a completely different universe of like morality and all of this. And you there was something that I think Ariel at the very beginning you said about you use the word judgment. You're and just like thinking about like, oh yeah, like we're not. It's not like this that you don't relate to it as this moment of like God is this like kind of like patriarchal figure that's like up, like, with the book open judging us. But I am actually kind of curious to tie in the thing that we say when we have heard that someone has just died, which is Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Blessed is the true judge. And I converted to Judaism. I don't know if you know that, Julie. But as soon as I learned that, I was like, it clicked for me, and it's like an automatic reflex. Anytime I hear of anyone who's died, Jewish or not, it just like pours out of my mouth, um, and I am really curious how both of you relate to that, and even to like the idea of judgment and like justice. I have an amazing mentor that I work very closely with, who is an incredible world class like expert on restorative justice, and I've done a lot of work with her and her colleagues where like a lot of the work is really like asking the question, what is justice even? Because it's not what our justice system looks like. That's like the furthest thing from real justice. And I'm curious what that brings up for either of you. I also want to be conscientious of time. If either of you have to leave, I have flexibility and I'm really enjoying this, but I want to be mindful of our time as well.
Yeah, maybe we'll sort of like bring it in for a landing after this because I'm also this is feels generative and important. Um, yeah, a couple of things that arose for me, Ganga, as you were framing that. So one is this idea of, well, first let me say about Baruch Dayan Haemet, this phrase that is traditionally said when we hear someone has died, which I just want to name. I actually said this morning because I just found out a dear teacher of mine passed. I just want to say his name, Rabbi Ronnie Kahana, one of just the most amazing, love-infused spiritual teachers that I ever met. Survived a severe brain aneurysm, and really, I felt like was gifted many years after that, and passed over the weekend. So just want to name him and send love to his family. So this phrase Baruch Dayan Haemet, the way actually our teacher Rabbi Marcia Prager translates that is a little bit different. She translates it as "Blessed is the judge of truth."
Mm.
And she goes on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, in my own words, but that oftentimes when we are confronted with reality that is harsh or is just hard to accept, it can feel not real, or there is a sense of like wanting it to not be real. And so to say this phrase, Baruch Dayan Haemet, blessed is the judge of truth, is like, wait, actually, first, let's start by saying this is actually happening. It's happening. Whether we want it to or not, this is the truth. This is what is. And now from that place, how can we be with what is? But we first have to accept what is for being reality. Um, and then only then can we know how to be with it. Or can we start to know how to be with it? And I think that's a really important translation that I don't think I've heard anyone else translate it in that way. And this idea of judgment, in Hebrew, the word tzedek, justice, has the same shoresh, the same root as tzaddik, as the righteous one. And in Judaism, we're taught that the tzaddik yesod olam is the foundation of the world. And I actually think on a deeper level, we are talking about that the restoration of balance in this world is actually the foundation of all that is. And that the tzaddik, this righteous one, is like an archetype for that. And that to me is how I define justice. Now, what that looks like in the particulars, of course, is a longer conversation, but it's the restoration of balance of what is from things that are extremely imbalanced. Yeah, Julie, I'll pass it to you. I would love to hear how you would speak about it.
I appreciate Reb Marsha's tweak on the translation. And to me, it's so similar. I would argue it's the same as in the Hindu tradition when we learn that someone has passed and we say Ram Nam Satya Hai, which means essentially like the name of Ram or the name of God is the ultimate truth. In the Buddhist tradition, there are things said around impermanence and truth and peace and rebirth as well. But it's that sort of not knowing in the judgment sense of not knowing. I don't know, but there is a truth that does know.
Yeah.
And
And
so
connecting us with words, and also that like what I love about Baruch Dayan Hamet is also that like we are the ones blessing.
yeah, right.
Like it's like I am in this moment blessing the
Yeah.
the divine truth of this moment, whatever that is. That like it's just like, oh, whatever I was just doing, I was washing the dishes and my mom called me up and told me that, so it's like, taking that moment to orient ourselves toward that truth,
Right.
um, as the first impulse of something that is going to almost certainly open up a world of pain and grief and, the what you experience of grief is just, like, all the love that you have not knowing where to go. And so just being like, "Oh, I'm connecting with this," as the very first impulse, the very first step.
Yeah, I think there's something really beautiful in Judaism that we really have a blessing for everything, even the hard stuff or even the bad stuff.
And even for, going to the bathroom, which we're using a lot during potty training times.
And I don't feel like it's a spiritual bypass either. I mean, really, can death be a blessing? Um, I don't think we're necessarily blessing that someone died, but we're blessing the not knowing or blessing the
Mm,
ultimate truth in this, like,
yeah.
"Oh my gosh, this too is part of the great mystery." But I will say, we've been talking about, like, practices and paths and justice and judgment, and I know the midterms are coming up, um, and I know a lot of people wanna disengage from, their civic duties, it doesn't feel righteous or spiritual or whatever, and I would say, especially when we think prison reform or Ram Dass had a picture of Donald Trump on his altar, same
It was
when
George Bush when I first met him, yeah,
yeah,
when I was 13, yeah.
exactly. Um, and I do want to say that when we think about, jails or prisons reform, it matters who the sheriff is, and it matters, who the DA is, and it matters who is in office. And I'm not speaking, from a partisan perspective, but I think it is, an opportunity to practice your spirituality, to vote. And so I wanna encourage people to understand the down ballot stuff that's not that exciting, like, your sheriffs and your judges, and speaking of the dean, and, you know, um, pay attention. See who's on your city council. Do they represent your values? Um, and to be engaged.
Mm,
Ramdas used to talk about, knowing your zip code, like, get in the game.
mm,
It matters. It really does matter. So
absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
you know, I say that on behalf of the folks inside, who would love to see some changes, I'm sure, in, the conditions of confinement and whether or not we incarcerate on certain, drug laws, and so it's
And those
important.
who do not have the ability to vote, do not have that privilege.
Right, and how much, from the county budget is allocated towards maybe hospice care or
Mhm.
drug recovery programs, things like that. So, anyways, that's my
Thank
spiel
you.
about the love in action piece.
Yeah,
Yes.
it matters, so much, and I have never been able to wrap my head around the rationale uh, that distances oneself from, like, I think that it's the most spiritual thing that we can do, like, is to show up for everyone by caring about our governance and everything. And, there's just no framing of it that, my brain can wrap itself around that, um, even if there's, like, the tiniest chance that your vote matters, it's like, um, I said in my Instagram stories just the other day, I was like, voting is like, or democracy is like a muscle, and it's not something that you just exercise every 4 years or once every 2 years. It's something that you can exercise every single day. And I was thinking about it also as, like, in the terms of, like, of muscles. My husband's an exercise scientist, and I was just thinking of, like, the term "use it or lose it," you know? And, like, this is definitely a use it or lose it kind of a period, crisis period, in our country. And, um, even if you don't believe that on, like, the larger scales of, like, gubernatorial or, national level, like, that it matters, like, your vote definitely matters down ballot. Like, show up at least for that, and then do the best that you can up ballot too. Like like, just give it a shot. yeah, thank you so much for bringing that. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoyed.
Thank you
Yeah.
both so much.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Ariel.
Yeah. Okay.
Beautiful.
Uh-oh. I think Ganga's freezing.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right. Well,
Right.
Shavua Tov. Have a good week.
You too. You too.
Yeah.
Love in action. It's a good place to end it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.